Okay, the third part of Simon Armitage's Remains, and we left on the thought last time of the idea of the structural feature of enjambment, the idea of a run-on line. And this part of the poem begins with perhaps the best example of enjambment in the poem, one that you could really dig deep and write about. But I blink and he bursts again through the doors of the bank. Sleep, and he's probably armed, possibly not. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds, and the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand, but near to the knuckle, here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. Really crucial end to the poem, and actually that sense of regret gets deeper and deeper as we get through the poem. Let's start with the enjambment. So the enjambment, again, that run-on line, that structural feature where one line moves into the next, where one thought moves into the next. So the idea of being constant, of being forever present, of being there all the time. And this is really crucial, because if you look at the enjambment here, but I blink and he bursts again. So look at the words here, blink, sleep and dream, all from the lexical field of closing our eyes. But each one gets deeper still. So a blink is a momentarily close of our eyes. You know, it's momentary. We don't even know we're blinking. Sleep is a little bit deeper, isn't it? You know, we fall asleep, we might doze, we might nap, it might be deeper. Once we're dreaming, when we dream, it's deeper still. And dreams have a sort of aspirational quality to them. They have the idea of comfort, of pleasantness, very much not the nightmare, perhaps. In this case, dream is used ironically, isn't it? Because he's not thinking aspirationally, he's not thinking positively. It's the fact that this man's life invades his every single thought, whether waking or sleeping, whether he blinks, whether he sleeps, whether he dreams. So blink and he bursts again through the doors of the bank. Notice blink is momentary, and so is that verb bursts, that speed of exiting the bank that these looters have obviously done. So the speed of thought reflects the speed of the actions as well, but it's with him constantly bursting through those doors of the bank. Sleep, and he's probably armed, possibly not. So even in his times where he should be relaxed, where he should be able to forget about what he's done, about what he's experienced, actually those thoughts invade his mind. And it's not the thoughts of the actions this time, but those thoughts of guilt, that juxtaposition of the adverbs, probably armed, possibly not, that uncertainty that digs into him, whether he's done the right thing or not, whether he really needed to end that man's life. And that's what he sleeps with all the times. That's why this image is repeated. That's why we've got the enjambment, because it's constant. It's with him all the time. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds. So this man's dreams are not positive. This man's dreams are not symbolic in any way. They are direct. They are visual. They are brutal. They're a constant reminder of his actions. And look at what the soldier tries to do to get over this. This is the everyday tragedy of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is the everyday tragedy of what many soldiers come back to the UK suffering from. And the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. We know that the soldier is affected in every single waking and sleeping moment. So the only way he can think of to stop those thoughts is through drink and drugs. But it won't flush him out. Nothing will get rid of the thoughts that he's left with. If you watch the video, you see the tragedy of him asking the army for help, but the army turning him down, laughing at him for even thinking about trying to get some help. So what's he left to do? He's left for substance abuse, to try and get rid of those thoughts, alcoholism, drugs. He can't get rid of it. Nothing will get rid of those thoughts of guilt and regret. He's here in my head when I close my eyes. So our minds are our real private spaces, aren't they? Only we know what is in our minds. And actually this outpouring of what's in his mind makes it even more tragic for that particular reason, that there's nothing else going on in his mind. He's constantly thinking. He's here in my head. Notice the present tense. He is here in my head. As this soldier is speaking to us through this poem, constantly thinking about it. Never leaves him, present tense. And all of the verbs are in present tense, as if he's reliving that moment again and again and again on a daily basis. Dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand. You might have noticed in those 2 lines that there's an awful lot of sibilance there. For those who don't know, sibilance is an alliteration of S sounds. Not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand. Now, sibilance, the S sound, is actually a fricative sound as well. Fricative sounds are sounds which have to force the air through the mouth, like a f or a sh, but a s. If you make that sound yourself, you're forcing the air through a small part of your mouth. And that's why a lot of expletives, a lot of swear words begin with a s, f, and it's because they are associated with feelings of anger and frustration. And so perhaps these sibilances are all to do with his frustration. He's angry with himself. It emphasizes the conflict. We might also look at the sibilance as the sound of the bullets. That's reflected a lot in Wilfred Owen's poem, Exposure. We've got some sibilant sounds there that reflect the bullets. So there's maybe a potential link there in terms of the sounds between those 2 poems. But if you think about a bullet going through the air, that sort of sound might be reflected there, and it's that constant image that's with him of the bullets that he's fired streaking through the air, ending this man's life in that brutal way. But near to the knuckle, here and now. Now, near to the knuckle is a phrase, or close to the bone. They're phrases, they're idioms that we use in everyday life. And it means they're too raw emotionally. They're too much to deal with. And that sense of being overwhelmed by his emotions, overwhelmed by his actions, are very much a central theme to this poem. So the idea is that this man's death that he's caused is always within him, is always raw, is always emotional, is always close to his heart, and we know it's in his mind as well. Here and now, here and now. So it's not a distant memory, it's constant, and again reflected in that phrase, here and now, as much as it's reflected in the present tense verbs all the way through the poem. This final line might be my favourite final line of all the poems. You've got to think about what a final line does with a poem. Openings and closings are really important. The final line is the final image that we are left with. It's going to really anchor what our responses to the poems are. This is what we're going to be left feeling. Think about kamikaze. He often wondered which had been the better way to die. We'll come on to kamikaze in another video. But that's a tragic ending. Think of Storm on the Island, different tone there, but a very, very clear ending. Strange, it is a huge nothing that we fear. So Heaney's tone at the end might be slightly warning, but it also could be quite reassuring. We could be left in either way. And just like those poems, the ending of Remains is really, really crucial. His bloody life in my bloody hands. And actually, it's that image that I want to focus on as the key quote for this particular part. His bloody life in my bloody hands. Bloody has 2 meanings, doesn't it? We can use it as a mild expletive. Oh, bloody hell. You know, the idea that we're frustrated, that we're angry. And that anger certainly comes through. We would call these expletives rather than mild swear words. That's the proper terminology to use. But it expresses his anger, his bloody life in my bloody hands. It's anger, it's regret, it's frustration. And that anger and regret and frustration are perhaps both at his actions, but also at the fact that fate has called this. Why was it him who had to be in that place at that time, ending this man's life? Why did that man have to run out at that moment? His bloody life in my bloody hands. Why was I left to be the one to kill this man? Why did it fall to me? And that sense of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Other soldiers potentially might have thought, well, at least we were there. We were able to stop him looting the bank, but not for the soldier in this poem. For him, it's absolutely the wrong place at the wrong time. And that bloody, if we take it on a literal meaning, really, the most obvious reading of bloody is the image of blood itself. His bloody life in my bloody hands, the sense that of the brutality of this man's life. And again, look at part 2 with all of those language features where we look at the brutality, the gruesome ending of the man's life. But his bloody life, the sense that it links to the blood shadow that stays on the street, but also in my bloody hands. Maybe he too has joined in tossing the guts back into the body, so a part of that man was left on his own hands. Finally, we've got the repetition of bloody. And when you repeat a swear word, when you repeat an expletive, that sense is really the anger, isn't it? What's he angry with? Well, we could leave that in a number of different ways. He's angry, of course, at fate, as we've said. He's angry at himself that he did it. Is he angry with conflict? The idea that war is wrong. The idea that war only leads to death, only leads to devastation. And if we link it in that way, so many of the poems talk about the ending of conflict as being pointless, as being unnecessary, as only bringing devastation and no good. We could look at bayonet charge, we could look at exposure, we could look at kamikaze, we could look at war photographer. Perhaps the only one that contradicts that in the anthology collection is Charge of the Light Brigade. But again, if you're linking poems together, you can link in a way that contrasts the two poems through. So you could look at this at the realistic presentation of regret, of anger, of death, and contrast that with the glorious presentation of the Light Brigade as they nobly charge and how we should honour them. So you could look at the contrasts there. My view would be that it goes better with the personal regret of kamikaze, with war photographer. So many reasons. You've got that sense of regret, you've got that cyclical sense, you've got some images that match really nicely, the blood shadow and the blood stained into foreign dust. Loads of links with war photographer. It links very nicely with bayonet charge, not just the sibilance, but the tone is similar, that actually the soldier has become the weapon, just as in Remains, he is a weapon himself. He's the one who's ended somebody else's life. So if you like bayonet charge, it goes really well there. Exposure, you've got to look at the overall tone there, haven't you? In this sense, regret and pity. And if we look at Wilfred Owen, My Subject is War, and the pity of war, those two poems go really nicely as well. So if you're going to revise a small set, think about which poems open up links to a number of different other poems. And I would say that Remains may well be one of those.